Hey, this is Mark A. Altman. I want to invite you to support a very special Kickstarter, 1982, Greatest Geek Year Ever, from producers Mark A. Altman, Roger Lay, and Thomas Vitale. 1982, Greatest Geek Year Ever. You're probably asking why. Well, I got Darren Dochterman here with me to tell us about some of the great films. Now, I want you to guess some of the films that came out that year. I'm going to give you a hint. Still, old friend.
Tron.
No, God, dude, that was one of the films, but that's not the one I'm talking about. Okay, you managed to kill just about everyone else, but like a poor marksman, you keep on missing the target.
Conan the Barbarian.
No, that also came out the same year.
Oh,
God, you've never listened to me before, Crom. Okay, you're making this really, really difficult. I don't have any quotes from Time Rider, the Adventures of Lyle Swan. What about this? You're not a replicant.
Oh.
I came across a turtle on a road. You turned it over.
Okay, that's The Thing.
No, it's Blade Runner.
Oh,
Gosh, that
right.
also came out in 92. But The Thing did come out in 1982. And as we all learned, man is the warmest place to hide. Hey, have you ever wondered what it's like to put out fire with gasoline?
I have not.
Do you know what movie that's from? The great David Bowie sang the song.
Oh, it's... I have no idea.
Cat People.
Oh, Cat People, right.
Cat People, Paul Schrader's remake of Cat People, 1982.
Nastasia Kinski.
Exactly. And John Hurd and Malcolm McDowell, who fans of this podcast may know played Sauron.
Sauron? You mean Soren?
Yeah, that's who I mean.
He played Sauron, the Lord of the Rings.
Let me try a few more because you're not doing very good at this. Okay. This house has many hearts.
Oh, that's that has to be Star Trek 2.
No! That's Poltergeist! God! I thought you were a Trekspert.
Well, I
There's
am.
no line like that in Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan.
I'm pretty sure there is. It's when Savick comes out of the turbo lift and says, "This house is clean."
Okay, I got one last one because I don't have anything from the Atomic Cafe or Missing.
Oh, I have something from the Atomic Cafe. Duck and Cover.
Duck and Cover. That's true. Very good. That also came out in 1982. And I'm going to give you one last thing.
Okay.
Silver Shamrock. Silver Shamrock.
Oh, E.T., the extraterrestrial.
Oh, it's Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. Oh, my God. Gertie could do better at this than you can. This is terrible.
Mark, I'm pulling your leg. I knew all of these. I just wanted to have a little bit of fun because all of these movies came out in 1982, the greatest geek year ever.
Indeed, they did. And if you want to learn all that is learnable, know all that is knowable in 1982, and have a great time doing it, check out our documentary on Kickstarter starting June 4th, the anniversary of Star Trek II and Poltergeist release, through the end of June, and support this Kickstarter. I hope you'll join me in making this really special documentary. I fell in love with the movies in 1982. I want to celebrate it, and I hope you'll help us do that by supporting 1982, Greatest Geek Year Ever, with an exclusive logo from Mike Akuda.
If you're a fan of the 4:30 movie, you'll love Best Movies Never Made, hosted by myself, Josh Miller.
And Steven Scarlatta,
where we explore some of the greatest movies never made, like E.T. 2,
Johnny Quest,
Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian,
and Halloween 3D.
New episodes available every other Monday, wherever you listen to podcasts.
If you're a fan of Inglorious Treksperts, you're going to love Treksperts Briefing Room, a new series.
Treksperts Briefing Room? What is that?
I was about to explain, then you interrupted me.
Sorry.
It's curated audio commentaries of classic Star Trek episodes, from the original series all the way through Enterprise. You're going to love it as we explore the behind-the-scenes making of all these wonderful Star Trek episodes with cast and crew that you would never expect to hear doing audio commentaries on Star Trek.
Sounds like fun.
It will be. And you can find it on the Inglorious Treksperts podcast feed and on the new Treksperts Briefing podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Let's go see
what's out there.
Hello, and welcome to the Cartoon Barroom, where we invite experts and industry professionals to pull up a stool and talk about all things animation. I'm your host, Steven Melching, and I couldn't be more excited for today's exciting crossover event episode. I can't wait to get down to it, but first, let me introduce you to your co-host, Ashley Edward Miller.
I share your enthusiasm, Steve, for today's mission.
Your Spock-like enthusiasm.
Yes, my very Spock-like enthusiasm, because I get to talk about two of my very favorite things. Number one, freaking cartoons. Number two, freaking Star Trek. And what better thing to talk about than a freaking Star Trek cartoon? In fact, the freaking Star Trek cartoon. And who better to talk about it with than our good friends from the Inglorious Treksperts, and a little podcast our listeners know as the 430 movie, Mr. Mark A. How do you pronounce your last name? Potwhistle? Altman, and his fellow Trekspert, DAREN DOCHTERMAN. Gentlemen, welcome to the Barroom. What are you having?
This is very exciting.
Thanks,
Darren.
I got a little Woodford Reserve here, and mix it with the little Wild Bill's Black Cherry.
Is that Shatner?
No, it's not, unfortunately.
I figured if it's good enough for Coppola to have wine, and Shatner could have Wild Bill's.
Oh, Wild Bill's Black Cherry. Have some today.
That sounds amazing.
I'm having non-sparkling bottled water with a hint of pomegranate Arbonne.
Oh, wow. Easy there.
Yeah, you don't want to overdo
Gotta
that.
make it through the hour.
No
take you home in a baggie.
No vodka cran?
No vodka cran for me tonight. We're recording this on Monday night. It's our second podcast of the day, and I am exhausted because I was exercising and had a bunch of meetings today, and I think if I would fall asleep during the show if I.
You've been at it all day. This is your second podcast. It's Millet.
Why, yes, it is.
It is Miller time.
And Melching time. That should be a beer. Steve, speaking of you, Steve, what are you drinking tonight?
I'm having my Kettle Van, an orange juice.
Van.
My Kettle Van in honor of Pavel Chekhov.
Not
Russian
the animated show.
Sorry, this is the
my
only way.
infinite Vulcan.
Oh, the irony. The name of the drink is the Infinite Vulcan.
How about you, Ashley? What do you got? What do you have?
Kids, Grey Goose, very dry, a little dirty, like a PG movie from the 1970s.
Captain Kirk's first date.
Captain Kirk's a little dirty, like Captain Kirk's first date. Exactly. It's,
like Logan's Run. Like Logan's Run.
Right.
That was PG. That's a little.
And it has,
Invasion of the Body Snatchers,
algae and sea
dirty.
plankton and sea grains and protein from the sea.
Yeah.
It's fantastic stuff, boys. Tonight the subject is Star Trek, the animated series.
I've heard of it. That's good.
Text that could be lower, not prose that could be digi, but Star Trek, the animated series. What many people consider the fourth season ish of Star Trek, the original series. It was brought to us by by Filmation, with the voices of the original cast, with Mr. Jimmy Doohan filling in with many as basically everybody. It's really interesting. It was the story editor on it was DC Fontana, the great late Dorothy Fontana, who is such a part of the creative tapestry that was Star Trek. And it's just, for me, what really stands out about it is that for the most part, it's
how she got that story editor title?
How? Because it was IATSE, and because that's what they call the head writer?
Gene cut her salary and said exchange to give her a better title.
Really?
Because he wanted to take more money for himself.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
Gene.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense.
What a great bird.
Right? That's great
He
bird.
flipped someone, the great bird.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, so basically this is the podcast about how DC Fontana got screwed over by Gene Roddenberry and she kept coming back for more.
She said that on Next Gen when she was writing the pilot, and it was originally an hour pilot, the Next Generation pilot. And then Roddenberry said, well, maybe it'll be 90 minutes, maybe it'll be 2 hours. And she said, oh, well, what do you want me to expand it? He says, no, I'll do it. I'll do it. You just write the hour, because he wanted the money. And she says, and her famous line was, I forgot, whenever I work for Gene, I lose money.
It's interesting how you consider it's often thought of as the fourth season of the original series because of all these holdovers. The cast continuity, some of the writers held over, some of the stories were even sequel stories or characters coming back.
More tribbles, more troubles. Mud's passion.
And I want to say the show came out in 1973 and 1974. I think it was 22 episodes total. I think 18 episodes in the first season. Maybe it's 24 and 6 seasons in the second episode. I want to say this might have been my first exposure to Star Trek on television. Yeah. I was certainly watching the original series in reruns at the same time, but as a 5 and 6 year old kid, they were probably somewhat interchangeable. I definitely have very strong memories of watching this show in addition to the original show. How about you guys?
I'm exactly the same. Exactly the same. As I watched the animated show, I realized that I had seen something like it on TV before, that I think one of my grandfathers was watching. But I wasn't familiar with it. I hadn't seen and remembered it. But certainly I was way into the animated show majorly. Certainly the first season, because it was every Saturday, and we got to watch all the adventures, and it was that was the time where the big explosion of toys happened. And the Mego figures and the communicators kits and the model kits and all that sort of stuff got its second boost, and really sort of jump-started the whole next generation of fandom at that point.
It's funny because for some reason I get asked the question. I do a lot of interviews about Star Trek, and I always get asked the question, how'd you get into it? And I don't really have a good answer because I don't really remember. But and I've been trying to think about it because I'm like, I always get asked this. And it's like the one question I really don't have a good answer for. And I do think, the more I think about it, that it was that I was watching the animated series. And I like that. I always remember that for some reason, the Magics of Megas 2 was always the episode I remembered. I don't know why. And I think that was led me to watch Star Trek in syndication, and that's when I fell in love with Star. I'm pretty sure, because I've never really been able to answer that question well.
And as a kid, it's easy to get them conflated as a kid with your little kid, because the design, the Enterprise looks exactly the same. You've got the same actors portraying this, playing their characters in animation, which is very rare. You've got some of the main titles. The opening titles are very similar with the voiceover and the Enterprise swooshing past, and so it's really easy to conflate the two, I think.
And I carried on a very interesting love affair with the animated series because I watched it when it was first on in 73, 74, but it's super young, so I didn't really remember it. And then it wasn't really available to watch because this was before home video. And then I think Nickelodeon started airing it in the 80s. And that was the first time I saw it in a long time. And I was like, I'd read the logbooks, the Alan Dean Foster. That's how I knew the show. But then I watched it on Nickelodeon. I'm like, this is really good. And then I didn't watch it for many years. And then I was doing a book in the early 90s. And I watched it on Laserdisc for the first time in 10 or 50 years. And that's when I really discovered it, I think. That's when I really realized that it was a special show and it can't be dismissed. And and then eventually I would end up watching it again when it came out on Blu-ray. But it's weird. It's there's these eddies and currents where I kind of lose track of it for a while, and then it sort of washes up on the shore again. And I then do a big binge, and I'm like, oh, cool. And then it goes away again.
The travelers are returning.
It's funny you mentioned the Laserdisc. I think that was the time I had revisited it for the first time in a long time. And I don't remember if Darren, you were there when our friend Dave brought over a bunch of Laserdiscs that he rented from Dave's Laser of the animated show. And we were just kind of binging them. And it got to be late in the evening, and it just ended up on the menu screen where it was playing that main title theme over and over again in a loop. And it just, it's that kind of groovy, jazzy thing that sounded like a 70s variety show. So we were just spent I want to say an hour just doing fictitious credits for this 70s primetime variety special, starring, with Mummenschanz, and, just, Donnie and Marie.
Oh my God. It's the Star Trek variety special.
You know what though? I mean, I think that the music in general was actually pretty good, man. Especially considering where they could have gone with the music for the animated series. That you definitely felt the DNA of what had been in the original series in that main title, and in the music for the score.
The incidental music, the score music, is so iconic of that time period that a lot of the later Filmation shows utilize those cues over and over and over. So it sort of melded into all of Saturday morning had this score to it. And absolutely. And the thing is that even on the Star Trek show itself, these cues were repeated so often that they became imprinted in your brain, and it's still the same.
I was so thrilled that when a couple of years ago La La Land released it on the Star Trek 50th anniversary compilation, because for years those tracks had been lost. And no one knew where they were, and said it's never going to come out. I mean, after that amazing box set came out of the original show music, everybody was saying, "Oh, when are you going to release the anime series?" I said it's never going to happen. So it was so great that they were able to do that, and it's not bad. And there's an interesting story because when the show was announced, fandom in '73 was very it's going to be a kid's cartoon. We knew, we would know animations like Godzilla and Godzuki, Scrappy Doo, right? So what you don't expect much, and these people took their Star Trek very seriously. So what DC
Unlike
did
today,
so DC, Dorothy, ran the opening credits at this big Star Trek convention in '73, and that's when they got the fans behind it because they saw, oh my God, it looks just like the live action version.
Oh, you're doing Star Trek.
Yeah.
And just before we move off the music for our podcast listeners, let's have Mark and Bill cut in a couple of tracks for you to listen to. For those of you who haven't heard some of this music, we're going to let you listen to a couple minutes of it and see just how fun and terrific it is.
Or Darren can just hum it.
right. So that music is great. So tell us a little bit, Mark and Darren, about how the show came to be. How did the show end up on the air?
It was actually instigated by Lou Scheimer, who was partners with Norm Prescott at Filmation. And they had been successful in dealing with, at the time, DC periodicals, because they did the adaptation of Superman, and that was very successful for them. And I think they'd done a couple other series, but nothing as sort of high noticeability as Star Trek would be.
What? That's insulting to the Brady kids.
Yeah,
the Brady kids
absolutely.
With the talking parrot, and the Brady kids met Superman. How could you dismiss that out of hand?
Easily. One of the interesting things is that they weren't pitching to have the Star Trek cast in a rock and roll band that would do songs, at the interstitial points.
I would pay real money for that.
Yeah, to see Lieutenant Uhura doing the
tambourine and like Spock playing the guitar.
Yeah.
Actually, Spock would be the keyboardist for sure.
But this is where Gene Roddenberry doesn't get enough credit for protecting the brand. Because Gene would not allow it to suddenly become Space Cadets or
something. Correct.
He's the one who said, I'm intrigued, but it got to be Star Trek, to his credit.
You got to make it Star Trek, and you got to pay me a lot of money.
Mainly, you got to pay me a lot of money.
Yeah, because, this was the time at which, 73, where Paramount, first NBC came back and wanted to renew the show because it was doing well in syndication. And Paramount famously said, we're not going to do another pilot. You have 79 pilots. So you have to commit to a season. And NBC wouldn't commit to a season. They'd only commit to a pilot. So that didn't happen. And then also Gene did the aborted script for The Cattleman, which was his feature attempt about a race of sentient cows that were being hunted by outer space ranchers, which was really, allegory laid on very, very thick. And it went nowhere. And it was a terrible idea. But so this was really he thought this would keep it alive because they didn't know how long, Star Trek, was going to continue. Like right now is a phenomenon. It was doing well, and the conventions, but they didn't think it was going to sustain.
There were only little hints of its popularity expanding because of the strip syndication that was going on. Only little hints. I mean, the first conventions that happened.
Little, Ensign.
Exactly. The first conventions had happened on the East Coast, and there was a little bit of groundswell, but certainly none of the indication that it was going to explode again like it did. But interestingly enough, it was the animated show that helped light that fuse.
Yeah. Do you think it was because it was just new content? Or was it because it was reaching people like us?
It's all of that. I think that, what the studio has been trying to do for years in modern times, that was successfully done in 73 by bringing in kids our age. Mm-hmm. It's literally the next generation of fans that didn't see the original show in first run, that if they were lucky, had seen a couple episodes in syndication. But we were still too young to watch it that late at night. But Saturday morning was the target, and we were the bullseye.
And it's fascinating, given how young we were, 5, 6, 7 years old, how sophisticated some of the storytelling was in these episodes.
Well, but you see, that's what made it so intriguing, because it wasn't talking down to us.
Yeah.
It was a real adult show.
But it's funny, when Gene came to D. Kelly and told him about the show, D. Kelly said, "This is a terrible idea. You're going to ruin this will be the end of the franchise. You'll do the cartoon, it'll be over." And Gene, being, the forward-thinking guy that he was, he said, "No, this is going to give it new life." And Gene was right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a miracle that the show didn't end up with some fuzzy little creature on the bridge that was the pet mascot on the Enterprise.
Right. And instead they got things that expanded our idea of what Star Trek aliens could be, like Mareks and Ereks. That was cool, man.
Or you do a story with a pet, like the great Spock episode Yesteryear, which is an incredibly moving, sophisticated story about
for
loss.
Adults, and something that children can absolutely identify with.
Yeah,
other than the clothing that
magical.
the children wore in that episode, because wow, yeah, they're all dressed up as He-Man. I didn't quite get it. But look, it's a great episode nonetheless. About loss. It's about something, right? That's the thing that makes it so special. And what made like the best of those episodes so special is they weren't just about kind of the cool high concept science fiction idea. Yesteryear was about, it's funny because there's this branch of fandom that thinks that Vulcans don't have emotions, right? You have an emotional Vulcan that it's wrong. And this is the episode where Spock says, no, Vulcans do have emotions. We've just found a tranquility through logic. We've learned to control it. And that episode is about, like, the funny thing is, he says that letting Ichaya go is the Vulcan thing to do. But the truth is, the argument that he makes, old self to young self, is the humane argument, right? Yeah. He's not saying, think this through logically, even though he kind of is. He's actually saying, ask yourself, who's suffering you are trying to extend and whose you are trying to prevent by making the decision to extend his life. And what an amazing message for kids TV.
It also gives, this is the sort of the first time that a new timeline was established. This timeline had Spock losing Ichaya as a child, right? And that hadn't happened before in the previous timeline. Right. And so that event helped Spock deal with his human emotions even better than before. So this expanded the Spock character, dozens of times. It's amazing that even just this little story just sort of opens up everything and makes the Spock character so much more interesting. It
so enriches the Star Trek mythology. It is probably the best Spock story, post original series.
It's so good that they ripped it off for Star Trek 09.
Yeah.
I think that, even episodes like Sarek, which people love, and some of the unification. Yesteryear is so poignant. And, the idea of having to euthanize a pet, any kid or anyone who watches it should be able to relate to it. It's very emotional. And even with the bad animation and the goofiness.
It really humanizes Spock and makes him an incredibly relatable character, not just through his relationship with his beloved pet, but when you see how he's treated by his friends, the other kids. Mm-hmm. Every kid knows what it's like to get picked on at school and what that feels like. And here you're having Mr. Spock, who you think of as this emotionless, calculating character, is, the victim of this torment.
But it's interesting.
Like working for Scott Rudin.
Oh my God. You think about how, in a way, you're telling the story about this friendless child. He's got one friend, his dog, his Sailot, right? And that's what he has to let go. Yeah. That's what he has to let go. And it blows my, it's so sophisticated and it's so kind of emotional and real. And like, there's that scene where Spock is adult Spock is trying to soothe Ichaya, and it's just, you feel for him and just in so many ways. I would argue that it may be the best, I don't know if it's the best Vulcan episode of all time, but as a character story about Spock, it's probably my favorite character story about Spock.
And it was 24 minutes, 24 minutes.
Yeah. The economy of storytelling is great. But I always remembered very powerfully, even when I forgot a lot of the other episodes, I always remembered Spock showing up and it being the Andorian first officer, and they had no idea who Spock was. Like, that was cool. And that's such a great use of canon, too.
Cool teaser. Yeah.
It totally is. And by the way, it also proved that you can bring back the Guardian of Forever and use it, and it doesn't have to suck.
one little character.
Right.
Disturb rather than marketing gimmick.
Yes.
One little technical thing about the making of this, that it shows up in the episode when the kids are taunting Spock. It kind of shows how the voice acting and direction was kind of off. And it was obviously we're doing it really fast and probably with some kids who weren't very experienced at doing this kind of thing. One of the kids yells out at Spock, "You're a Terran, Spock." Okay, first of all, they don't know the word Terran. And no one knows what this line means, but they still went through with it anyway.
Right. It's like my audio book.
They're like, you know what? Screw it. I don't even know what it means.
It's like the listening to my audiobook when I listen to the audiobook read, where they have no idea what these words are and completely, Idic. It's like, okay. But it's true, and it's important to note that with the exception of one episode where all the cast was in the recording studio together, right, everyone was recording it separately. And unlike, now, they were literally putting it on like cassette tape or going into a studio and just mailing it into the studio. Yep. So it's like Mad Libs. They're cutting together all these different
It's amazing you get any cohesive acting at all. And it's the fact that, all these actors who certainly were playing their original roles knew how to voice the characters correctly. So everything meshed together fine.
Can we talk a little bit, since we're talking about the voice acting? I would first like to praise Jimmy Doohan for attempting to do basically everybody, but I want to talk about something very particular. The counterclock incident.
Yeah.
Captain's log supplemental. We have 11 minutes of real time left to reach the dead star, but all around, my crew are turning into children, unable to operate the ship. How is our course, Mr. Sulu? I don't know. What am I doing here? What is all this equipment?
We will need to disconnect the tractor beam at the appropriate time.
Tractor beam? How do we do that, Spock?
Commodore April, command is yours.
Commodore? I'm Captain April, Mr. Spock.
But the Enterprise crew, they're all children.
If stars begin as dead stars here, then we could bring one to life prematurely. Hang on, we're going right into the heart of the Nova.
Let's just kind of put it out there. The voice of Robert April sounds like Jimmy Doohan is doing a bad imitation of Darren Doctorman doing an imitation of Gene Roddenberry. You want to talk about a violation of temporal causality? There it sits.
Okay, which is a shame because you could say it's a silly premise that the crew of the Enterprise is getting reduced to be infants, but it is really a great statement about ageism because they're putting April and his wife out to pasture because they've reached such an age and say they have nothing left to offer. And it's only when everyone starts de-aging and becoming younger that they realize, how important his knowledge is. It's like, hey, boomer. Okay, boomer. Thank God for the boomer. Right.
Right.
And
that's like a Battlestar Galactica episode, by the way. Okay, boomer.
So, as silly as the premises is, it is actually a really kind of cool episode that, like all great Star Trek, has a really important message, at its core.
But I'm going to only slightly disagree with you. Because, look, I love that episode, actually. But I don't think it's nearly as successful as something like Yesteryear for a very simple reason.
Nothing is.
And nothing, you're right, nothing is. There was almost not a fair comparison. But I think Yesteryear works better as animation than the counterclock incident does. I think the counterclock incident would have benefited from being an hour-long, being live action, having an actual actor and a performance with scenes. Because in the counterclock incident, that story lives entirely in our heads, right? Robert April and his wife, they never really emerge as fully fleshed characters who are in any way wrestling with the ravages of age, right? We mentioned Sarek before. There's an example of it. Are all good things. Or I understand there was some sequel to Star Trek that was all about that. But in the case of the counterclock incident, it just kind of happened that way. And it's a great message. You're right. And I've always loved the idea that Captain April Commodore April, was on the Enterprise, and that happened. But I don't know that animation was the right home for it. It feels like something where there wasn't much of an animation imperative as much as there was with some of the other episodes.
Well, you got to remember all those second season episodes were sort of the leftover scripts from first season. So, DC Fontana left at the end of first season because they didn't want to pay her for second season. So second season was pretty much the leftovers, or the stuff that they just bought. So they didn't really get the same kind of a love that the first season got. But I still think it's an interesting episode. Although, Jimmy Doohan during Robert April and then Michelle doing, it's like, my plant is dying. Oh, no.
She kept the voice when she got younger.
Yeah, I know.
And which is, it's just, there's this whole thing. So, and this is the...
D. Bradley Baker, they ain't.
No, but who is, right? D. Bradley Baker came on this show and then just started doing clone voices one after the other, like perfectly, just like nothing was happening. And he's just one clone, and I'm Crosshair. And then he's like, I'm Hunter. And then it was, how the fuck are you doing? But, it's just like, I think we can agree. It's like, it was great that we had the original cast in the animated series. It's perfect that Shatner is in it.
Now, isn't there a story about how they all ended up?
Oh, yeah.
Why don't you tell us the story of how we ended up with...
Darren, you want to tell that story?
You tell him. Tell him, Jim.
Tell him, Jim. So it's very interesting. So, NBC had put together this whole, the one time they would all be together for publicity purposes to record. But when they showed up the recording studio, George and Michelle weren't there. The voices of Sulu was to be done by Doohan. Could you imagine that now? And then Major was going to do Michelle. I was going to do Uhura. And Nimoy said no. He said you got to have. They were doing that to save money, and Nimoy said no. You have to have the entire cast. And he was willing to forego Walter because he wasn't part of the original crew first season. Right. But he insisted that they hired Michelle and that they hired George back.
And this is only because he knew that Jimmy Doohan couldn't do a Leonard Nimoy voice.
so they ended up hiring them. But of course, then they had, Michelle do a couple of voices. Majel did a ton of voices. And, Jimmy Doohan, as we've joked on our podcast, is the man of 1,000 voices that all sound the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's not a lot of separation with Jimmy Doohan's voices, as we say in the biz.
George was game to do a couple extra voices here and there too. I could detect him, but there's some uncredited actors on there. Like, what's his name came back as Cyrano Jones.
Yeah, Stanley Adams. Yeah, and then Ted Knight is on.
Ted Knight. Ted Knight.
And also,
you just want to watch that episode just for Ted Knight.
I love the fact that they brought back, because they could have easily just had Doohan or somebody do these voices, but they knew it was important for these key guest stars to bring back Roger Carmel for Mud and Stanley Adams for Cyrano Jones. And as for the Klingons, I don't think they did. It was
no. The Klingons were either Jimmy doing a Klingon voice or Lou Scheimer.
Oh, right.
Oh.
No. Yeah. Wow. They didn't bring like Ansara or Kalikos or anything.
Oh, no.
Too bad.
No.
Did they have Mark Leonard in in Yesteryear?
Yes.
Yeah, which is also an amazing for kids animation that they took it seriously enough to bring these people back as guest stars. And the fact that there were so many sequels to original episodes.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine? More Troubles, More Tribbles, Yesteryear, which is in a way sequel to City. But the one that people don't talk about is Once Upon a Planet, which was a sequel to Shore Leave, and Mud's Passion, which was another Harry Mudd. So you got 4 or 5 episodes that are sequels to the show from the 66, 67, 68. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, this is a kids animated show from Filmation, who the only good thing they ever did was Flash Gordon.
Right. And, the rumors that were flying around in the 80s and 90s that Roddenberry didn't consider the animated show to be canon, BS. That is not true. Of course it's canon. It had all these original writers. It had all these original actors. Of course it's canon. However you define that, if it fits within the universe of Star Trek, of course it was. And I think that there might have been a couple things in it that Roddenberry didn't consider that fit very well within the universe. But I think,
but if you asked Roddenberry, he would have told you that Star Trek 2 shouldn't be.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's a shame, that they did not call Archer Robert April in Enterprise.
Yeah.
That was it absolutely should have been Robert April. That was always considered the one element that was definitely canon from the animated series. And it was so short-sighted and disrespectful, because all it would have been was changing the character, was using the character's name, and it would have fit much better in the canon. And
I would have been fine with it.
Yeah,
and I probably would have watched more than 2 episodes.
Me too. But it feels like one of those things that, frankly, in the sense that we were kind of talking about, Dorothy Fontana saying, like, I forgot, like, when I work for Gene Roddenberry, I lose money. Like, there is something about the decision to not name that character Robert April and to name him Archer.
Of course.
It feels very Roddenberry-esque.
It's monetary based. Of course it is.
It's got a fine tradition. I want to talk a little bit about the animation. Now, look, it's Filmation. Filmation is not like, where you go for wow. I mean, nobody sits back and says, Star Trek the Animated Series, that was a beautiful show. Or really anything that like Filmation did, you go, that was a beautiful show. However, there is something that I find really cool about what they did, which is the ship, right? Which I think it looks to me like, and I don't know this for a fact. It was rotoscope. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it looked like they definitely did rotoscope, take a couple of those. They used the same establishing shots from the live action show. They rotoscope like that shot where it's flying up over the dish or when it's swooshing towards camera.
Absolutely.
And the orbiting around the planet where it's changing perspective. And then they did those simple 2D cards that would slide.
Yeah, the side view that goes right past. I'm going to take umbrage at the statement that it's not a beautiful show. It is a beautiful show. It's just not animated beautifully.
Right.
That's the difference. I think the shot designs are great. I think that all the compositions and all the design of everything in it are really beautiful and takes the Star Trek world and expands it, a little bit. I mean, we see, different rooms in the Enterprise that are places we hadn't been before, but they still fit in with that Matt Jeffries aesthetic and really alien worlds that we had not seen before. And I have to argue that the first episode of it, what's the name of the first episode? The something star.
Beyond the Farthest Star.
Beyond the Farthest Star, yes. Duh.
You are correct, Captain James T. Kirk. And I have the starship I've waited for so long. So terribly long.
It has absorbed the memory banks, Captain. All of them.
You will now remove the static shield from the navigation console, Captain James T. Kirk.
You have shut down life support systems and endangered members of my crew. Restore those systems first.
All non-essential systems are extinguished. You will obey me.
And if I refuse?
Obey me.
Captain.
Obey me.
Stop. You'll hurt him.
Remove the static shield from the warp drive controls. Do it now.
No, Captain.
I'll obey. Let him go.
Repair the warp drive controls. Obey me.
Mr. Scott, start repairs. Install the auxiliary controls.
Aye, Captain.
I'm all right, Captain.
What are we dealing with, Spock?
High-ranked probabilities, Captain. It is a magnetic organism without mass, but capable of symbiotic relationship with a host body. A starship, for instance. It is a form of primal energy, and it can utilize the electronic control systems of a starship like the mind of a man uses the neural control systems of the human body. It has become the Enterprise.
Has perhaps the most creative alien ship design ever seen in a Star Trek project. I mean, this giant, sprawling pod ship with, these tendrils and these sort of insectoid shapes in it is truly mysterious and scary and unknown and something that we'd never seen before. It still feels extremely Star Trek.
Well, I mean, the fact is, it's written by Sam Peoples, who wrote the second Star Trek pilot and was an acclaimed science fiction author, and also was the one who advised Roddenberry. He gave Roddenberry, when Roddenberry was doing Star Trek, all those pulp covers and educating him about sci-fi. He was the one who said, you can't have Mr. Spock as this red-tailed devil who eats food through his stomach. You know, it's too, the audience can't relate to it. So Sam Peoples was essential to the origin.
And apparently he's the one that came up with the split infinitive to boldly go where no man has gone before.
He invented that. It was like nuclear fission, only different. I mean, look, I don't disagree with anything that you just said in terms of the design. I think, and it to its credit, it maintained the aesthetic of the original series. And there were some really cool designs in there. And I thought that the use of the rotoscoping was really brilliant.
But I agree with you. Their methodology for having to crank out these episodes, where, you know, they sort of, along with Hanna-Barbera, they sort of developed this method of limited animation to make it possible to make weekly, animated
So
shows.
there's lots of shots that are like, you're sitting back and it's static and it's silhouette. Or it's
one moving image, one sliding image in the shot.
Or it's a close-up where they only animated the mouth, like the rest of the face.
And you can tell because the rest of the face is not, because the turns aren't totally working. And it's just, what's I think most amazing about that is that the stories are so good that you forget about it.
Yep. And watching it again recently, I was really looking at it as a, you know, in retrospect, as a, after my, so far many years working in animation, I can't imagine anyone would ever pay for this, but if you could take those original elements and redo the animation with modern stylized CG 3D animation, keep the same voice tracks, maybe swap out some of the ones that are obviously doing, but maybe keep them for old time's sake, but take those same scripts and translate them, direct them in a way that's maybe a little, in keeping with the aesthetic of the original show, but also, more modern, I guess.
Well,
there have been at least 3 pitches of that
to do that.
Yeah, but Roddenberry is a huge advocate of that. He said he used to always dismiss the animated series, and he finally watched it, and he was like, "Oh my God, you should be redone in CGI, state-of-the-art CGI, keeping the original voice tracks." Yes. And I think it would be great. I would watch that. It'd be like having a 4th season of the original series.
Absolutely.
If you could, swap out some of those guest voices and redo the animation.
And something else, some of the sound effects, they use the original sound effects from the show, and for some reason, like the red alert sound effect is different. But give a consistency to the sound effects and keep all that other stuff. Because the stories I think are really strong.
A couple years ago, I had the opportunity to have access to a clean DM&E track of one of the episodes.
So they have clean tracks?
They do.
Wow.
They do. And I was able to take it and sort of just replace the music track with original series music. And it's quite an interesting thing to watch this episode. It's almost like it's brand new.
Wow.
And I actually showed Dorothy Fontana. And she said, "Wow, that works really well."
Just by changing out the music.
Yeah. It feels exactly like Star Trek then.
So, Mark, you brought up Sam Peoples. There are a number of really great writers who worked on that show, and some surprising, configurations of things. Like you have, Larry Niven, like during this flavor weapon.
A self-destruct mechanism would not have a gun sight.
No. Let's see what this does do. We can't give him that.
Fascinating. No world in the Federation has produced anything so powerful. Almost beyond theoretical limits. Total conversion of matter to energy at a distance
If the Kazenti had that, the whole galaxy would be their dinner table. Hit the dirt!
Bringing the Kazenti sort of into the Star Trek universe. With
Larry
that.
Niven,
And
one of the great science fiction novelists of all time, but
Right.
certainly at that
Ringworld.
time, writing an episode of the Star Trek animated series.
And I love them bringing the Kazin in because, of course, that opened a whole new mythology in the Star Trek universe. And they've been referenced in other Star Treks later. And it was really interesting because, of course, that was something he had created for his own novels. And the fact they were now part of Star Trek universe. And then became a big part of the tabletop game, I think it was, the role-playing game. And, you know, they were a great species. But, of course, you know, they were painted pink, you know, like was often the case in with just always, you know, Ivan Ackerman, always the wrong answer. Unfortunately, you know, the story may be apocryphal that Hal Sutherland was colorblind. So you had stuff like the Kazenti being pink, you know, where they were fearsome alien warrior race, you know, and then you had
adorable.
The Orions who were supposed to be green, and Pirates of Orion are I forget what color they were.
The Orions.
The Orions. I didn't realize for years they were the Orions because they kept calling them the Orions.
They're like the Terrans.
Right.
the Terrans and the Orions. The Baltimore
Have you heard
Orions.
Shatner pronounce Quadrotriticale and more troubles? What's he say? Quadrotriticale.
He does say sabotage.
It does, and it sickens me.
Well, and you had David Gerald writing a couple episodes, who of course wrote on the original show and is a novelist and screenwriter. In addition, you had Walter Koenig.
Yeah.
Well, that was sort of his consolation prize for not being in the show. And at first he was really excited, but he says after he did his like 8th or 10th rewrite for Gene, he wasn't so thrilled for what he was getting paid.
Right? It's like the rate could not have been that great. Was it the Infinite Vulcan?
Yes. Yeah, the Infinite Vulcan.
Right. So he wrote infinite drafts of it for
where the main antagonist is either Stavros Caniclius 5 or Stavros Caniclius, depending on who's saying it.
Yeah.
Because that was the attention to detail.
But I love that you have an episode like Magix and Migas 2 where, you know, Satan is put on trial and he's our hero. You know, he was being unjustly.
And I got to give a shout out. That episode was written by a friend of mine, Larry Brody, who wrote on Voyager. I think he wrote an episode of Voyager, maybe, or Next Generation. But
he had pitched Next Gen. Yeah,
he was a writer on all the great 70s action shows. A great career writer producer in television, and just has so many amazing stories about people, and wound up writing an episode of Star Trek the Animated Series.
And Gene was really happy and brought him in for Next Generation. His experience on Next Gen was not as good, but he did have a good experience on the animated. I think he's one of a million people who threatened to write a book about his experience with Star Trek. But sure, as short as it might be. But yeah, and there's so many great people that wrote, and of course, John Culver was a pseudonym for the publicist on the show, Fred Bronson, who was the publicist at NBC, but he couldn't write on the shows that he was publicist for.
Right.
So he wrote under a pseudonym as John Culver because he lived in Culver City. And so he wrote, So he wrote, the counterclock incident, which was, the last episode. And then, we had on our show, we did a commentary on Treksperts Briefing Room with Howard Weinstein, who was a young college student, sold his script, The Pirates of Orion. And it was so funny because when Lou Scheimer said to him, "Oh, we love the script. What else have you, who else have you written for?" He goes, "No one, I'm a college student. I'm in college." And they couldn't believe it. And, he had his script, his first script for Hollywood, bought as a young college student. And, and then it subsequently went on and wrote a ton of Star Trek comics and Star Trek novels like Covenant at the Crown. But really nice
great
guy.
runs on the comics.
And and you have a couple other people that were veterans. Stephen Candell on
Sure.
Mud's Passion.
Mud's Passion.
Captain's log, stardate 4978.5. We are approaching the Arcadian star system on a mission to locate an old friend.
Captain Kirk and the ineluctable Mr. Spock.
What is it?
My love potion. Not delusion, not trickery, dear Nurse Chapel.
Oh, sorry, sir.
Dear, lovely Christine. I can't stand the thought of any danger to her.
Love. By the way, anybody keeping a trace on the captain and Mr. Spock?
Thanks, Jim. It's good to have a friend like you.
Strange, that's the way I feel about you, too. My dear friend Spock.
Which is also a terrific very funny episode. It has some great lines. It definitely fits in well with the Mud and Mud's women stories and the character. It gets a little big, as a Saturday morning show where they're fighting dinosaurs. But yeah, they all get infected by the love, the love potion. Yeah. And it's a lot better than Deep Space Nine's fascination, and it is wonderful because it's like McCoy is all drunk on love, and he's like, the Enterprise, if she had a heart, I'd heal her too. I mean, it's just like it has some really funny, dialogue in it.
Yeah. So, the second season goes 6 episodes. What happened? I mean, because we talk about the animated series as being, the element of the canon that brought people like us into Star Trek, that kind of kept the fire burning in the in-between time, the original series and the reemergence and the
interregnum.
Yeah, and it won an Emmy. Don't forget it won an Emmy.
Yeah. The second season won an Emmy for Best Children's Program, I believe.
Yeah.
And yet, 6 episodes. So what happened? How did the wheels come off that bus?
I think part of it didn't. I think part of it was that they were realizing that the reruns were getting just as high a rating as the original ones.
The reruns of the
show.
Hour show. The Hour show or the animated?
No, of the animated show.
Yeah, it was kind of typical of the era. Most of these animated shows didn't go very long, particularly based on an IP. Because what happened is the kids would age out, so it was all new to them. The repeats were new because it was a different. So Star Trek, it was it was an expensive show to do, and they repeated it for quite a long time. It was never really something where, the idea would be, this could go a 3rd season, this could go a 4th season. I mean,
they didn't have to. Yeah, they didn't have to maintain the audience week to week because there was always new kids coming in.
And it was interesting because Scheimer went to Roddenberry right when Next Generation debuted and said, "Hey, maybe it's time to do an animated Next Generation series." But it was right before Roddenberry died, and then it never happened.
It's interesting you say that because not 10 years later, the animation landscape was totally different and the goal was 65 episodes so they could strip it Monday through Friday for 13 weeks. But in the early to mid 70s, you're just concerned with Saturday morning. There really wasn't much to speak of in afternoon.
Right. You didn't have to worry about what was going on in the middle of the week. You just had to cover the number of weeks in the year, which is just too bad.
Yeah, because it would have been great if the show had gone longer. But like I said, the second season, really, there was no one minding the store. It was all, Scheimer. And by then Hal Sutherland was even gone. So it was just the Filmation partners because all the work and all the money was really spent during that first year. And the second year was just sort of like the leftovers, being reheated.
Do you think the actors would have had the patience to stick around and do more episodes? Or do you think they would have just been happy to cash the check and do the work?
At that point, I think they were glad to have the paycheck and glad to be able to do this stuff from wherever.
Right.
Although in retrospect, they're very dismissive of it. If you read any of the interviews or talk to, Bill or Leonard or any of these guys, they were all very dismissive of the animated show.
Yeah, but that's just because they've never watched it.
Right.
I mean,
exactly.
It's just silly. I mean, it's the same thing that they repeat all this stuff that they hear in the press about Star Trek: The Motion Picture, about it being slow and boring. No, that's just because they've never watched the film. It's just silly that Shatner has never watched an episode all the way through of the original series.
He doesn't like to watch.
He doesn't like to watch himself. But the thing is that they don't understand what they've got there, and they never have. And they only
know what they've got here.
That's right.
They only know the reaction that they got from the crowds at the conventions.
And God knows. I mean, I would argue that for some of them, the supporting cast, as it were, that the animated series is part of the reason why that
they are actually considered part of the family. Absolutely.
That's right. Mm-hmm. That's right.
And
if it were just the original series?
Day players, because they were integral to most of those stories in the animated show.
Yeah, you got to imagine if it was just Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and then Lieutenant Eric's and some other rando new characters, if they would have
Lieutenant Rando.
If they would have really made it into the into Star Trek Phase 2 and the motion pictures eventually.
Well, the only time that Uhura is in command of the Enterprise is in the animated series.
Yeah,
she's left in command.
Is that the Lorelei signal?
Lorelei signal, yeah.
I feel like that would be Robert Meyer Burnett's favorite episode. I could be wrong.
The sirens who lure the men of the Enterprise to their doom. Yeah, it sounds familiar. But yeah, I mean, and a lot of people forget, when they talk about, how prescient the original series was, and they said, oh, well, but Next Generation introduced the holodeck, presaging virtual reality.
Wrong.
No, the animated series did Practical Joker. They had the holodeck. So, even that was something that was part of the original. And then they say Next Generation.
And the ship's computer becoming sort of sentient and creating this personality where it's playing these goofy jokes on the crew.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, absolutely. The holodeck is a huge, and the holodeck not just being a thing, but being a mortal danger to the people that are stuck in it.
So the holodeck malfunction episode was also created by
You've made 2 errors. You're wrong.
You
fans of Next Generation.
So, well, then go ahead.
I'm sorry, Mark.
I was saying also, like they say, oh, the iPad was sort of presaged also by Next Gen. No, just the thin version, because the original show had the iPad too. It was just a little thicker, than later in Next Gen. So which is not to take away from Next Gen, but I'm just saying,
no,
all the heavy lifting was done by the original Star Trek. Right. Everything else is just a copy of the original Star Trek.
The original series was revolutionary. Next Generation was evolutionary.
Very, very well put. Very well. No, it's actually very apt. It's a great way of putting it.
So let me ask you guys this. So, we said 24 episods total? 18 and 6? And I mentioned
16 and 6.
16 and 6. Okay, so
22.
So, I mentioned that the counterclock incident probably would have benefited from being an hour-long live-action show. Are there episodes that you guys think about that's like as even great as animation would have been made better by being live-action, or might not have worked as well as live-action?
Absolutely, Yesteryear should have been a live-action episode.
You will not disappoint Sarek in your Kazwan.
I wanted only to help Ichaya. He was my father's before he was mine. To lose him...
A Vulcan would face such a loss without tears.
How?
By understanding every life comes to an end when time demands it. Loss of life is to be mourned, but only if the life was wasted. Ichaya's was not.
Spock?
Yes, sir?
It has been too long. No antidote known will save his life.
Is there nothing you can do?
I can prolong his life, but he will be in pain. Or I can release him from life. I will need your decision. He is your pet.
Release him. it is fitting he dies with peace and dignity.
It's just so wonderful. I don't know how they could have done it. I don't know how they could have done Ichaya at the time. But seeing that for real would have been amazing, honestly. And as far as if a live action version wouldn't work as well, I think that's only due to the capability of visual effects and photography at the time. I think if they had been redone now, there is nowhere that they couldn't go.
Yeah, but you got to remember, a lot of these pitches were for the third and fourth season of the original Star Trek, and they were rejected by Fred Freiberger. Like, David Gerrold was pitching a sequel to Tribbles, and Freiberger said Star Trek isn't a comedy, and then and then you had Dorothy was pitching some stuff, and I think Mud's Passion was also being developed for the original series.
But honestly, I think that those work better in an animated situation because they don't feel as important as a sequel to the original show would in live action. And I think that they can get away with a lot more that way.
Captain, the engine room is filled with Tribble.
Well, we can do something about that. Attack. He did it to us again. That tin-plated, overbearing excuse for a starship captain did it to us again. Blast that thing.
Any other orders, sir?
Yes. Don't do that again. Ever.
A simple shot of neoethylene will fix everything. The Tribble colonies will break down into their individual units with a slower metabolic rate. And these really will be safe Tribbles now.
What about the Klingons?
Well, unless they treat their Tribbles too, that ship isn't going to be big enough for all of them.
Say, you didn't get this one, Bones.
Oh, yes, I did.
But it has...
Someday I'll learn.
Aye, Captain. But you've got to admit, if we've got to have Tribbles, it's best if all our Tribbles are little ones.
Because I think, for good or ill, more Tribbles, more troubles is just the Tribbles redone with the glamour.
Right. There's no compelling reason.
But it works in animation. One episode that doesn't work is Once Upon a Planet, which is the sequel to Shore Leave, which doesn't work as well as it should.
Yeah. It gets distracted and
but what makes it not work?
It's less character. It's more about, sort of these sort of
it's more about events happening rather than a story.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Right. And it's interesting that the animated series fell prey to some extent to some of the classic tropes of animation that you see that we always kind of joke about in the writers' room, like, when are we going to do the episode where they all turn into babies, or the episode where they all shrink down. They did a shrinking episode, so we
got to do a heist.
Yeah, incident.
Yeah, exactly. They weren't immune to some of those classic tropes.
What would have been a great live action episode though? It would have been, and you mentioned it earlier, the Slaver Weapon would have been great. Would have been great. It would have been mysterious and weird and creepy, and it would have actually fit in very well as a third season episode.
It felt rushed, and so it probably could have benefited from a longer running time as well.
The whole idea of the slaver boxes and stuff, it would have been really cool. And Jihad probably could have been better as a and look, a lot of these, it's a testament to Alan Dean Foster that they work much better in the novelizations.
Absolutely.
Because he really fleshes them out.
And some of them he fleshed out to full-length novels, right? Or
at the very end.
Yeah.
At the very end, because what happened was he was doing 3 a book, and they were selling so well that Judy Del Rey said, you got to slow down. Because we're running out of episodes. So he got to the point where he was just doing one a novel. But he said, how am I supposed to take a 20-minute show and turn it into a whole novel? And he started adding material that he pitched to the original show, third season into the novels.
And then Fred Freiberger was like, Star Trek is not science fiction. Star Trek is not a drama. Star Trek is just not very good.
And he applied everything he learned to Space 1999.
That's right. By God. Although he did get the, that show has a kickin' main title, so
yeah, both seasons. Both seasons.
Yeah.
And it has Maya second season. So
damn right it does. Damn right it does.
And then
go ahead, Steve.
And then Star Trek and animation lay dormant for decades until recently. And we've got a number of animated shows going now. There's at least Lower Decks is on the air now.
And then the Nickelodeon one, which is now airing on Paramount, which is sort of for kids, for kids.
For kids.
Prodigy.
Is that actually debuted yet?
No.
Not yet.
No. And I honestly, I know a lot of people, there seem to be a lot of people that are fans of Lower Decks. I honestly just haven't seen it. So I can't speak with any degree of authority because I haven't seen it. And I doubt I'll watch Prodigy, not because of any reason, just I guess it's for kids. So I'm
right. And isn't that interesting though? Right? That Jesus, how long was it? 50 years ago? People are telling Gene, don't do this as a kid show. Yeah. Right? Don't do this as a kid show because it'll destroy the franchise. And that they somehow made this great show that kids loved and embraced, but really, it was an adult show.
Yeah. And I think that's why we all liked it, because it was, I think when we were growing up, and I can't speak for kids now, but I liked watching things that I couldn't quite understand or that I understood was a little bit beyond my grasp. It was sort of aspirational, not in the way of aspiring to behave like the characters, but to understand the story, or this is a grown-up story that I want to.
I'll tell you, I'm not going to go onto a podcast and talk about Emergency +4.
Well, I want to give Steve his props because, along the line of what you're talking about, Clone Wars does that. Clone Wars was a show that was for kids, which is, but that an adult can watch and get so much out of and enjoy immensely, and that enriched that universe so much. And Rebels did the same thing. And now Rebels is sort of serving as the jumping off point for all these live action stories, which is amazing. And look, I'm loving the Bad Batch right now.
Yeah.
So what those animated properties have done for that Star Wars universe is it's grown the Star Wars universe. It has become an important part of canon. It respects canon. And I just love it. I hope that, going forward, whatever Star Trek does or doesn't do, that they can learn from the Star Wars example, because that's animation done right for this type of storytelling.
Right. It's you'd never think of, you do think of the Clone Wars, etc., as being the kid show, but it's totally not. And I don't know that anybody, and Steve, you can speak to this with some authority, that I don't know that anybody involved with that ever thought of it as, this one's for the kiddos.
It went through some growing pains where it whipsawed back and forth in early development between being, I think it started off very hardcore, kind of where Clone Wars ended up, very serious. And then it whiplashed back to being, maybe it's going to be a kid show with the youngling adventures, and then it kind of went back the other way. And you can kind of see a little of that, especially in the first season or two, where there's a little bit of schizophrenia in the tone of the episodes before it settled into a groove of just telling good Star Wars stories, which are just good adventure, smart adventure stories.
But look, some of the most beloved characters in the Star Wars canon, from Ahsoka to Saj Ventress, these are all characters that came out of the animated show. I'd love to see that with Star Trek.
Yeah.
To me, the only one that is worth a damn is Mr. Arix. Yeah. And that's barely, but I love Arix. I just liked his design. I thought it was cool. When Hallmark came out with the Christmas ornament, I bought it, even though I'm Jewish, because I love Mr. Arix.
Yeah, it would be great to see a modern Star Trek animated series along the lines of this original Star Trek animated series that's trying to tell the same kinds of stories that we loved about the original show, that were these sort of, allegorical stories or good emotional science fiction stories.
It's not hard. They tell you in the credits what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise to boldly go where no one has gone before. It's very simple. They tell you in the credits.
Every
what the
week.
show should be.
All the time. They don't shut up about it.
It's not a mystery.
Okay, well, what's not a mystery? Well, also is not a mystery. We're getting the high sign for the bartender. I want to thank the Inglorious Treksperts. Last call, the Inglorious Treksperts, Mark A. ALTMAN and Darren Docterman, on loan to the Cartoon Barroom. Thank you for joining us.
Well,
was there anything you'd like to plug? Mark, I know you probably have
Perhaps we have a podcast.
Well, thank you for asking, of course. I want to say, if you're first hearing Darren and I and are fan of Star Trek, I hope you'll join us at Inglorious Treksperts every week, every Friday, available wherever you listen to Cartoon Barroom. And, of course, our sister podcast, Treksperts Briefing Room, where we curate audio commentaries for classic Trek episodes with fans, writers, and producers from all the shows. So,
and we've done an episode of the animated series.
We had actually Howard Weinstein on to talk about Pirates of Orion. It was a great episode. Yes, Orion. I'm sure we'll return to that place again as well. And there's also, we did an Inglorious Treksperts with Dorothy Fontana, a year and a half ago, which I thought turned out really well. So I hope you'll check that out. And of course, if you're a fan of Star Trek, you might want to check out my book, The 50-Year Mission, Oral History of Star Trek from St. Martin's Press, available in hardcover, paperback, audio, and digital. So we hit for any possible format you wanted in other than Braille, it's available. It may be a Braille. I don't know.
Darren, anything you'd like to plug?
I don't have to plug anything, although I think that we are going to be at the Creation 55-year anniversary convention at the middle of August in Las Vegas.
Vegas, baby.
So I hope you'll join us there. We're going to be there. We're going to be doing our Inglorious Treksperts live Viva Las Vegas edition. So maybe we will have a few cocktails and take a clue from you guys.
Right on. Well, thanks again. Thanks again for joining us and talking about the Star Trek animated series. On behalf of Ashley Edward Miller, I'd like to thank our sound engineers, Bill Ritter and Mark Rivera, our producer, Natalie Miscali, our co-producers, Peter Holmstrom and Zach Ragatz. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider subscribing and rating us 5 stars in the Apple Store. It really helps us spread the word. You can also check out our sister shows, The 4:30 Movie, in which this same group of people, industry professionals, curate a fantasy theme week of classic movies. You've already heard about the Inglorious Treksperts and the Treksperts Briefing Room. And The Best Movies Never Made, a podcast about films that never saw the light of a projector bulb. You can watch all of these podcasts and much more on the free Electric Now video streaming app. Download it today at your favorite app store. You can also follow all of these shows on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. So until next time...
live long and prosper.
That's all, folks.
This show was produced by Dean Devlin and Mark A. Altman and is an Electric Surge Network production.